Dargaville, New Zealand. Paranormal experience. My partner and I travelled to New Zealand a few years back. We were living out of a van and tried our best to utilise the freedom camping spots on our trip. We arrived in a town called Dargaville. It was a quaint little town that reminded us both of the old Wild West movies. There was one camping spot which was located on the grounds of an archaeological machinery museum. If you brought tickets to the museum, then camping was free. The staff were really friendly. We were unsure what to do the following day as it was going to be a Sunday. Many things to do were shut in New Zealand on Sunday. We were the only people staying on the grounds of the museum. It was dark and the place had a slightly eerie feeling, but I couldn't place a finger on it. We went to sleep and woke up the next day and proceeded to head to the town. To our surprise, everything was open. We looked around the charity shops. We noticed that a lot of the local people stared at us as if we were aliens. It felt very bizarre, and though everyone was polite, we didn't feel wanted or welcome. Upon checking our calendars, we realized that it wasn't Sunday and that it was in fact Monday. We had lost the whole day somehow. Did time skip forward? We often discuss this and what could have happened, and I could not find any information about paranormal activity in Dargaville. Has anyone else had a similar experience to this in Dargaville? Or any ideas what could have happened? The Forgotten Highway. On New Zealand's State Highway 3, you'll encounter a section of that road that goes from Stratford to Te Aotearoa. On a particular section past the Horua turnoff is what truckers and commercial drivers like to call a haunted section. Last time I drove the section, it was maybe around 2:30 a.m. There wasn't a single car around, no street lights or nothing. Once you go past the Ohura town turnoff, it gets much creepier. I drive a lot around New Zealand, hardly ever this road, however. Usually I would rather take State Highway 1 or 2. However, I needed to be back home at a certain time and there was too much traffic on those roads. Some of the things that have been reported after the Horua turnoff that I know of are the World War I soldiers. As you go past this forest, you may notice the World War I soldier standing next to a World War I tank hiding in the bush. I've heard truck drivers say that as you drive past, his head follows you. The next one is known as the 1960s woman. She stands next to her 1960 Volkswagen Beetle. It's a faded yellow and lying upside down in a ditch to the side of the road. She stands next to it, her dress, which is black and white with flowers on it. People also reported that she has palish, transparent skin, and, like the World War I soldier, she follows you with her head as you drive past. The other one is known of as the Black Dog, a sort of 2D full black bull. It's got no eyes and a 2D body. If it runs out in front of you from the side of the road, you will hit it. When you hit it, they say it means you will have a car accident. And the final and the last one is known as the Yeti. I learned this one from a truck driver in Taupo, New Zealand, that in the early 90s there were a few kids camping around there. One night they all dressed up as Yetis and walked off the side of the road, and whenever a car would come past they would jump out in front of it. Unfortunately, one of them was hit by a truck, and people still see them to this day, and they say that their spirit lingers there, jumping out at trucks as they go past. This is a creepy experience that I have had myself. Recently, I was driving on this road in my sub. As I get past the turnoff, I definitely get this creepy feeling, and as the road got darker, I switched my high beams on. I hadn't seen anything until I got past the teeny little town that had a school called Marco School. As I left the tiny part with about 5 houses, something felt eerie, very eerie. I felt as if someone was in the car with me. So I look at my passenger seat, there's no one there. I look at my back seat, the same thing. And as I look into my rearview mirror, I look up, and ahead of me, I see the so-called black dog. It runs out in front of me. I said to myself, what the fuck? And rubbed my eyes. I was very freaked out. So naturally I put my foot down on the gas to leave the road, and I guessed that the phenomenon was right. A week after that accident, my beloved Saab 93 was unable to stop, and I ended up rear-ending a car. I still get scared driving on that road today. New here and rather skeptical when it comes to paranormal activity, but this is one experience that I had. A little background. My mother was killed 16 years ago, and I don't exactly remember anything about her. Her and my father had somehow become honorary members of a Maori tribe. My dad mentioned all of this in passing one night, so I don't remember which tribe or how they became members. So I thought it was a cool thing, something cool that I could bring up when I went to New Zealand. Anyway, on to the story. Last year, I went on my first holiday, and I decided to go to New Zealand. I almost didn't make it there because I am very nervous as a flyer. I live in Australia, so it was only a 3-hour flight, and I had almost missed my flight on purpose and then went back home. This was my second day on my holiday, so still a little jumpy from flying turbulence, and my tour group had gone to a marae, which is a cultural meeting place for the Māori people. When you approach this building, you pass under an arc. When you reach the halfway point from the arc to the building, you stop and call upon your ancestors. Being that I was at this place of cultural and spiritual significance, I said a short and general prayer. I guess I put as much faith as I could into it. As soon as I had finished, I felt a hand on my shoulder and looked behind me, but no one was there. I wasn't alarmed, strangely, but a mixture of sad and longing. I brought it up to the elder that had been hosting us later that night after he had spoken to our tour group. He smiled kindly and asked me if there was someone I missed who had passed on. When I told him about my mother, he nodded and told me that she was with me, letting me know that she was still here. Now, I don't know if that was a legitimate encounter, but it is something that I still remember and do question. My encounters within Waikumete Cemetery. I lived right across the road from Waikumete Cemetery for a little under 15 years and enjoyed regular walks through it, as well as training for distance running back when I was able-bodied and free of injury. As the largest cemetery in New Zealand, it has been the subject of many paranormal occurrences. The black figure that stands watch at the old chapel, the man in a top hat walking amongst the headstones, and even eerie feelings near an old tree where the bodies of 2 convicted killers were buried are just a few examples. My experiences with the place have been relatively tame, but curious nonetheless. First time. In mid-2012, myself and a friend decided to take a stroll through the cemetery during the late evening at around 11:30. This was our first such excursion, and we had agreed to meet at the crematorium before venturing out. I arrived at 11:20 and looked towards the entrance of the crematorium to see someone who I thought was my friend pacing impatiently outside beneath the light. This was an entirely dark silhouette with the definition of a male, but no truly distinguishable features other than being heavy set with the body gestures of someone who had been waiting around for a bit, and he was directly beneath the lights outside the building. I called out from no more than 50 meters where he was and said, "Hey bro, I didn't think you'd actually show up." He then proceeded to walk away to my right-hand side, northwest, and behind the building, completely ignoring what I had just said. I called out and said, "Bro, where are you going?" and was about to chase when something inside me said, "Turn the fuck around and run." It was as if some force stopped me dead in my tracks and made me realize what it was I was about to follow into complete darkness. Hastily retreating to the entrance, I spun around once near the gate and took off sprinting up the Great North Road. And who did I see 200 meters up past the lights on Hepburn Road? My friend, strolling down as if he were the big boss man. I knew for sure that definitely wasn't him playing tricks on me, as he wasn't that quick, and would have been rolling on the ground winded if he did. I detailed to him what I'd saw, and he almost hightailed it right the hell out of there and headed back home. The only other incident that night was the tapping we heard near the Erebus Memorial beside the Great North Road. We actually seeked out the source, since I was adamant it was only a tree grazing the fence or a little flower fan thing with something stuck to it. But no, the sound was coming from directly behind a headstone and stopped immediately once I said, "There it is." My next encounter happened in 2013. There's an Unearthly, a Māori cemetery at the top of the cemetery, southwest corner below the water tank, which I walked past one night after venturing out for a pack march and going a bit further than I had anticipated. The time was 9:30 or thereabouts when I entered and made my way down past the Unearthly. No vehicles were present and no people were walking around. People who do stroll through at night tend to keep their flashlights handy, from what I've encountered. Striding past it, I heard humming from a man's voice. It was discoherent and had no real depth despite being hummed, as if this person was humming for the sake of humming. There were a few scattered lights up ahead, inside the Unearthly itself, and a minimal illumination from off the hill, but I didn't identify anyone around that area whatsoever. My first thoughts were perhaps someone or something was trying to hum Te Pou, which is the Ngāpuhi chant detailing support, sustenance, and emphasis on the first and last pau. Whānau, family, and Waiarua, spirit. Now perhaps some old fellow was on the source and they're chanting for a loved one at such an hour, but I can't help but feel a kihua, ghost, or guardian was watching over someone in particular. With 30 kgs on my back and legs weary from marching 8 kilometers already, I ran my ass the fuck out of there and stopped at the top of the road leading down past the mausoleum. After catching my breath, I made my way down to the closest avenue, followed it for some 400 meters, and then turned into Freesia Road. I went past a section to my right, east, and heard the stranded cry of an infant. The sound grew slightly louder the more I looked towards that particular section. Like an idiot, I called out to the crying infant with quivering in my voice, saying, "What's the matter, Pepe?" I expected some spirit would smite me or some shit. Instead, the crying grew faint until eventually it was no more. That was that. I soon realized it was coming from the children's sanctuary, which I believe was under a rebuild at the time. I had thought that only stillborn babies were entered there, since I don't think stillborns would cry, but I can't be too sure. Maybe it was just the exhaustion fucking with me this particular time, but it stuck with me ever since, as have all the incidents of me and the paranormal encounters. I have other stories to share for sure. The next lot will focus on either the time I spent down in sunny Waiaru or that creepy stuff that happened out of the ranges some years back. I don't live near Waikumete anymore, but I was thinking of setting up a RVR post or something to see if any locals wanted to do a nighttime excursion into that place with me. I haven't done that in 4 years now, and still haven't fully satiated my curiosity with that cemetery. I still revisit the area during the daytime and take a walk through the cemetery when I do, old habits and such. Waiaru Military Camp, the spiritual home of New Zealand Army, and where countless of soldiers have trained in all manners of warfare since the 1930s. My grandfather, 9th Intake National Service, and great-uncle, Koi 1st Battalion RNZIR, would talk about Waiaru, Papakura, and Burnham camps with fondness, sharing many interesting stories of the time that they had spent there training and readying themselves for whatever the Crown may have required of them. Neither man was very spiritual in the paranormal sense, and I don't recall them speaking of any strange happenings whilst on any of these camps. They did acknowledge, however, that Waiaru had a feeling to it, one that you'd never forget once felt. Even the sheer number of soldiers who had passed through Waiaru, many of who never returned home, you'd be hard-pressed not to feel some sense of energy in the camp. I'd like to start this post by detailing a few incidents. Some of these I experienced myself or was told about in person. The remainder of this post will go into depth with one of my own personal accounts and make a special mention to a few other stories that have emerged over the years. Barrack Monster. Our platoon had just performed fatigues and were assembling outside to be briefed on the rest of the day's actions. One of the boys from my section made a remark about a certain strange happening in our room a few days back, which intrigued the corporal as he'd been away during that time period. Initially we tried to downplay what our friend was saying, but the corporal insisted we pipe up and give our own accounts. After doing so, he began speaking of one incident that he and his platoon witnessed during his basic training years ago. A corporal had instructed them to double outside and form up on the parade ground as they had just finished doing their fatigues. The platoon was formed up as they saw the corporal make his way to them, when out of nowhere an almighty crash rang out from the corporal's direction, startling not only the recruits but the corporal as well. They watched as he spun around to check what made such a sound. The recruits broke formation to double back and check as well, but the corporal instructed them to stay back. An entire room had all of its tallboys flipped upside down perfectly, as if they were made of nothing. These tallboys weighed an easy 30 kgs on their own, but with clothing and equipment stored inside, it can certainly double. Each room contains 10 tallboys to be used by the recruits, and all 10 tallboys were flipped. Not one by a group of recruits, but all at once by some meddling energy. We honestly called his bullshit. Once he had finished, to which he responded with a truly soul-sapping death stare and assurance that what he said was in fact the truth. This particular corporal was the one NCO where you knew when he was screwing with you, so we questioned his story no further. Encounter 2, Squad Shun. Sundays during basic are pretty chill, all things considered, which allowed us to let down our guard ever so slightly and catch up with the team properly. I was in the corridor with a section member polishing our boots when I decided to ask if he had noticed anything happen in our room since we had been there. It was currently week 4. And his reply was not what I expected. There's usually some dude at the end of our bed doing drill, bro. I scratched my face to this, and he continued explaining that he had witnessed this dude doing about turns, ease to attention, and present arms, among other drill movements. The dude, as he described him, was devoid of both colour and sound, wearing battle dress that resembled the uniform worn by the Second World War up until our involvement in the Southeast Asia campaigns in the 1950s, where the jungle green uniform became the standard issue kit for the army. Of note was his description of the figure holding a rifle resembling the No. 4 Lee Enfield, which was withdrawn from service in the 1950s, and the variations in drill movements which differed from the ones we were taught. I then asked if this figure had ever tried interacting with him or doing anything he saw as hostile, to which he replied, "Nah, bro, I think he just keeps watch over me." It was surprising for me since I had never had this guy stick out to me as the ghost or paranormal type, and also because he had never made mention of this before, and probably wouldn't have if I didn't ask. That's just the kind of guy he is, I suppose. Maybe that's why that soldier took a liking to him. He put his head down and got the job done. Third encounter, lights out. Events like following, or that are similar to, have been reported by other soldiers who had been in Waiaru in the past. And the following passage is how I personally recall this particular event when it happened to me. Lights out for us was at 10:15, but we'd packed into our beds 5 minutes prior so we wouldn't miss the last post playing from the speakers. Some bastards were still silly enough to try to talk shit with each other, despite it being a general understanding within the entire section that we'd shut up and listen to the last post each and every night. Needless to say, they often got their own lights punched out instead. During a weeknight in the 5th week training, I decided to break my own routine of leaving my bed tucked in tightly once I had gotten in and settled for the night. It honestly felt like I was in a straitjacket, not that I had known what that feels like. So I thought I'd sleep with the bedding loose that night. The corporal on duty poked his head in, remarked that we were all sexually confused for not finding him attractive, and switched our lights off to a chorus of laughter. I spent a good 5 minutes fidgeting around and trying to properly unwind before untucking my sheets on both sides and finally being free within my own bed. Still awake after 20 minutes with the sound of snoring travelling through the room, I lightly began tossing the sheets up from the sides and watching them fall back down. I did this 4 or so times before I felt them getting heavy. My arms fell to my side and all I could do was dot my I side to side, as my sheets were tucked back under my bed in one short, sharp movement. Feeling utter horror and perhaps slightly paralyzed from the feeling of being weighed down, I remained completely still, right up until I fell asleep. For the remainder of my time in training, I always ensured my bed was kept nice and tight, whether I was in it or not, lest the soldiers of the past disagree with my change in habits for once. This next section will focus on my own personal account. It has been a while since this event took place, and I've surely done a number on my mind or memory with what I've been up to in the recent years, but this memory still remains as clear as if it had happened the night before last. Event 4. I hate the smell of cordite in the evening. During a stay in the MTC, Medical Treatment Center, I remember speaking with another guy about his life and what he wants out of the military. We spoke for a good hour or so, getting up once to make a cup of tea and farewell the day nurse before the night nurse clocked in. There was only about 2 of us, as the rest had been returned to their units, so we were placed in the ward adjacent to the kitchen/rec room. He was in the bed closest to the kitchen, as I was on the opposite side of the room, 1 bed across from the kitchen. The night nurse came through at 9 o'clock to give us our medication, mine being a dose of ibuprofen and paracetamol and a drink of water. Before switching out the lights to the entire ward, leaving only the light in the nurse's station on, the pain in a certain lower extremity not subsiding and still not doing so years later, I fell asleep rather quickly, much to my delight. An undetermined period of time had passed when I found myself awoken to the lights in the entire MCU being turned on and a loud banter coming from all directions. There must have been at least 30 different people speaking, when I heard what sounded like the doors swinging open to the ward and a frantic chatter following it. I do not recall any distinguishable words being spoken at this point, and quite frankly, who could with that amount of people all speaking at once? What I do recall, undoubtedly, is the smell of cordite, a propellant used in ammunition, a waft of which overpowered every other sense of mine and made my vision blurry. Moments away from blacking out from this, I faintly recall a male voice saying, "There's been an accident." The next time I woke up, the night nurse was huddled over me with my next dose of medication. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. I asked her about the commotion that I heard earlier, prompting her to screw up her face and ask, "What commotion?" I then went on to detail what I had heard/seen, and that apparently there had been an accident. Taken aback, she quietly responded to me, "It's only been the 3 of us here since I came to give you your last round of medication 4 hours ago. I wouldn't know what you're talking about. Sorry." Still with a look of shock on her face, she asked if I was feeling okay. I responded, "Yes, ma'am." Disregard what I said, I must have been imagining things. She smiled at me before making off back to her station. I want so badly to chalk this up to a dream, but the one thing for me that personally disproves this theory is the strong smell of cordite and the true feeling I had being awoken as those events unfolded. I've only ever had 3 dreams where I smelled something, and those smells were very faint and lasted only a few seconds, whereas that smell of cordite lingered strongly for a good 10 or so seconds before I was unconscious. Sometime later, an ammunition technician was having a small talk with us, detailing blinds or UXOs, unexploded ordnance, a little more in depth than the initial lessons we were given. He then referenced one particular accident during the Singapore Armed Forces exchange where a round went off while still inside their 155mm howitzer, killing 2 SAF servicemen instantly and wounding several other soldiers, including some of our own. The ammo tech said this served as a reminder that poor safety precautions and inadequate ammunition storage facilities/practices can and will lead to an accident like this, and yes, this was the first time I'd ever heard of this particular accident. The 155mm howitzer, 2 dead servicemen, an accident. I have no knowledge as to whether or not the injured were actually treated at the MTC, though I assumed that they were, or if the deceased had passed through there, but I can't help but summarize that somehow I relived moments of that day, or perhaps another similar accident that I am not aware of. Certainly, I cannot deny the details and the feeling of it all, that is for sure. Recent articles seem to suggest that Wairu will see an even further decrease in personnel within the next 3 years. Basic training is slated to be shifted to Burnham, where new purpose buildings and facilities are being constructed, with Wairu to be used mainly for major field exercises and other such maneuvers. I don't recall which units will be staying or going. All that history will remain at the camp for a long time, if not forever, since Wairu sits on land that no sane person would want due to the amount of UXO still dotted around. To finish up this post, I would like to make some special mentions. These are stories that were passed on to me by others who had been to Wairu, soldiers and civilians alike. Some details are a little cloudy, as it's been a while since I even thought about this stuff, so I ask that you bear with me a little bit, please, team. The woman of the hospital field. This incident supposedly led to the entire camp being mobilized to find her. The troops who had heard her were making their way back east to the barracks from the 100-meter range. Manning? Passing hospital field when they heard her blood-curdling screams. No woman was found during their extensive search. Hole in one. A recruit, possibly a part of Intake 303, I don't think they called them AARC back then, staying in Melamine East Barracks, where I had stayed during my time, made his way to the obolitions one night to relieve himself. Upon returning to his room, he looked at the fire door to see the reflection of a man staring back at him with half of his head blown off. The story goes that that particular recruit was in almost a catatonic state for the rest of the night, and apparently left the army the very next day. For the record, I don't recall seeing any such apparition whilst I was there, but then again, I never ventured to the obolitions on my own after lights out. Cold bodies. The Conference Central Centre, which I believe used to be the camp's theatre back in the day, has been the scene of quite a few strange incidents. Again, I didn't personally experience anything whilst I was there, except to say that I had felt sick every time I entered that building. People I'd spoken with reported that they experienced what can only be described as the sort of talking and general banter you'd hear on a bus or train with a group of people who knew each other, when the room was otherwise completely silent, since you wouldn't want the corporals or sergeants kicking your asses for breaking noise discipline. Most interestingly is the fact that one of our corporals advised us during our stay at the CCC to not reach out to someone at night. His reasoning being that we might grab a hold of a body that wasn't warm. Of course, they never told us until after we had been there, but the CCC was used to house the majority of the deceased victims from the 1957 Tangawai train disaster, which claimed the lives of 151 people. The victims were held in other parts of the camp as well, one of those places being the Galatos West Barracks, which was also home to the Regular Force Cadets unit in 1991. The Grey Lady. A friend of mine told me about an encounter that he and some others had with a Grey Lady, appearing in the rearview mirror as they drove around the camp. One person who saw her spoke of the dread that they had felt upon seeing her, made worse by the fact that she appeared to be getting closer to his vehicle despite her being on foot and him doing about 40 kilometers an hour. Actions on Grey Lady sightings. Put your foot down and don't stop. Smoko after sundown. Troops heading back in from the field after company-level exercise made their ways past a West Lawn hut, approximately 15 kilometres E&E of the Foley Street Powell's Ave intersection within the main Waiaru camp. I wish I still had that topu map. One night, still in a high readiness state after all actions performed earlier, one soldier recalled marching back as part of his platoon. When he looked over to the hut, he saw a group of soldiers sitting around having a smoke break. What immediately struck him as odd is the fact that they were wearing Great War/Second World War battle dress with tin hats, Mark 1/2 steel helmets, and had old Lee Enfield rifles. He recalled that one soldier leant forward to offer him a cigarette, to which he responded by continuing past without acknowledgement. This next one is a very special mention, which didn't take place in Waiaru, but deserves a mention due to the sheer particularity of it. The Lost Soldiers. During the Second World War, a group of British soldiers stationed in New Zealand were conducting training in Huai, which is a small settlement nestled within the Waitakere Ranges. As they ventured out one night for training, they failed to return the following day. No trace of them was ever found. Fast forward 40 years to the late 1980s, and the Territorial Forces unit was out in Honolulu conducting night maneuvers. One truckie on his Unimog happened across a group of soldiers sitting patiently on the roadside. Feeling compelled to give them a lift, he stopped the truck and met them at the tailgate of the vehicle. Watching as they embarked, he noticed their uniforms were of the old battle dress pattern, with the Mark 1/2 steel helmets completing the vintage of 1940s assemble. None of the soldiers spoke a word, the look of complete exhaustion providing ample explanation as to why they weren't. As puzzling as this seemed, the soldier shrugged it off, locking the tailgate of the vehicle and getting back in to continue his journey to the rest of the troops. Moments had passed when he approached the TF staging area. He stopped the truck and moved to the back of the tailgate, still locked up. He opened it to an empty row of seats with not a single soldier in sight. The Brits, being the balmy bastards that they are, could have surely drove out of the rear moving transport and ducked back into the bushes, but the look of exhaustion and fatigue these soldiers displayed seemed to suggest that they wouldn't have had the energy for such shenanigans. No soldier fitting their description were reported to be operating in that area at that time, further suggesting this to be a paranormal encounter. Going off that last story, I've tramped across the entire ranges and have completed the Hillary Trail once, back before I became a US. Huai has always been a no-no for me, and I hated the fact that my friend wanted to stay the night at the bottom of the Karamatura track during one trek we did through there. Certain parts of Scenic Drive give off some truly bad vibes to me, especially when you consider its recent history. The disappearance of Iranian Asher and the death and dismemberment of Cameron Thomas, who was found not far from the Arataki Visitors Centre. That case, Operation Kipil, struck me as deeply disturbing from the moment I first saw her face in the Herald. I fear that walking anywhere near the visitor centre may trigger some event involving her due to the gruesome manner in which she was taken from this world. It is my hope, however, that she isn't tethered to this horrible world, and instead at rest. Thanks for reading, team. As per my previous post, I still plan on returning to Waikumete for a night excursion, but that mightn't be for a month or so at the earliest. No one has registered their interest in going with me, so it would appear that I'll be heading in on my own. Yay. It should be a good one either way, and I will be filming it with only my cell phone, an Xperia Z3, due to the fact that I don't have a dedicated camera. Illumination will be provided by a Phoenix PD35 light with the phone mounted on my body. At this point, I'll be heading in at approximately 11:30, allowing a minimum of 45 minutes to move from the opera to the crematorium. That's all for now. Stay safe out there. Well. Kia ora te whanau. Grimm here. Welcome to the end of my, telling of these terrifying paranormal events. Thank you very much for making it to the end. Do what you normally do if you do like these things, such as like and subscribe, leave a comment. It all really helps me out. Anyway, I'm not going to drag this out. Thank you very much for making it through. Be safe wherever you are. And, as always, I am Grimm, and I'm, signing off.